Mm.
Dr. Adams, as the next person is getting ready to speak, on page 468, he specifically says the problem was that having mortgaged our time to make a living, we had none left for thinking of ways of living.
Whew, there it is.
There you go.
No, no, there it is. There it is. That it's. Let me just say that. Well, let me just say before I say anything else. And us listening to each other and thinking about folks and things. Please, in the chat, people are having conversations and co-signing, and it's a beautiful thing. I know we're all, while one person is speaking and we're listening, we're also listening to the chat through our eyes, looking. Maybe, and we've kind of done this and laid out what this book is about, and in the context of us doing what everybody does when they first pick up a book, or most people do, which is, what is this book about? So you see the title, but if maybe with y'all's indulgence, maybe we can do just quickly for anybody who might kind of be lost, because we started talking about the characters and we kind of put the back of the book gives us the framework for the story. So people didn't know. So he just writes on the back of the book, he says, as a professional interpreter, Fert works at conferences where Africa's rulers meet, not to solve the continent's problems, but to beg for solutions from past and present masters. She knows that under foreign occupation, Africa's abundant resources were pillaged in a raw export economy that pauperized Africans to enrich invaders. But it saddens her that, after independence, African rulers did not choose intelligent technological and industrial paths to prosperity, instead of maintaining the destructive globalizing status quo. Nefert endures her depression, Kat, as you brought up, in loneliness, until she gets drawn into a circle of highly skilled friends, looking, like her, for a key to an African future. Her spirit lifts as the group's research uncovers an ancient way of knowledge and creative work, long suppressed during the centuries of foreign oppression, but still accessible to seekers ready to read the oldest of African writings. So just give people a sense that they didn't, know where we were talking about. And so that group, he's naming the Resolutionaries. And I guess that's where, as I and Kathy, y'all were talking and sitting here scribbling, thinking about that, I guess, as you say, Kat, making a mockery of those conventions that we had, and not being trusted, and how we try to scribble things for ourselves. A couple of things come to mind as you talk about this question of whether we can raise parallel spaces. One is a character we haven't introduced yet, and I just read her as a white woman. Maybe she's not white. That's the kind of trust fund woman, Sally knows, who wants to bankroll her in exchange for her love and affection or companionship. And Sally uses her not as a user kind of thing, because Sally, of course, as we know, we'll get into that, is the most skeptical, because Sally likes these nice things, but she also a real good human being. But the question I was thinking about is, what is the role of resources? Because you need resources. After all, this benefactress puts the floor under them in terms of the dictionaries they need, the grammars they need to start doing meta nature. But it comes as a gift from this woman who says, I know I can never be part of y'all world. And of course, that made me think about Eloquence of the Scribes, because Armah got people like that, non-Africans and Africans. When you look at the list of donors, the list of contributors who helped him start Per Ankh, some of those people are white people, whether they be English or Americans or others who he knew in England or in the US when he was up at Harvard and around there. So you got these resources. So what's the role of resources? And then the other one that comes in terms of this question of companionship. Now, we haven't introduced them yet. There's this whole contingent of maybe would-be companions in those translators, which is fascinating, because as we said, as they come into these international conferences on the African continent, with these big money banks and corporations, with these puppet heads of state doing whatever the bankers want, the translators themselves have a group, and most of the people in translators are not resolutionaries. And I'm thinking, is this a metaphor for all the people on our job, all the people who want to be free, but who ain't really trying, all the people who are working at Clapton or Howard or anywhere else, who are in the courthouse or over at the job, and say, look, I hear what y'all saying. Oh, y'all, yeah, we're gonna study meta nature. How are we gonna get paid off that? And you see them, they're trying to recruit. And that brings me, that's that second question, as you said, this question of parallel places. All the places that we have been part of over the years, and previous generations contribute, whether it be the Kemetic Institute in Chicago. That was Jacob Carruthers and them, getting resources from their own initiatives, a little bit of space at Northeastern Illinois in the Jacob Carruthers building, trying to build a contingent of companions called the Kemetic Institute. That's where Larry Crow and them come up. First World Alliance, the Institute of Positive Education, where Larry used to work, the school they started in Chicago, Haki Mahbudi and Safisha Mahbudi. In this generation, it's the Emma Johnson, Dirigo Wari. It's the school, right? We need a place where we can build some companions. We understand a little bit of resources, and we're going to get a little bit of space. And that's the idea behind Nubia. We just need a little bit of resources so we have a little bit of space. And then Baba Adesoji, that's the idea of you convening this virtual space. Adesoji speaks knowledge. We just need a little bit of resources and a little bit of space. And so that's where that second question becomes, what does that look like? Particularly when people who we want to join us got to see it first, like those translators that are like, wait, we're going to do what? Wait, okay, wait, I don't know. We got to do it. And we got people, which is why I love to see maybe a little bit later on what people thought about in chapter 7 of this Negro academic, Dr. Stanislas Fiaga, who reminds me of everybody from Henry Louis Gates. These are the Negroes who I'm going to learn African history to offer it like, who does that? It's Ngugi and something torn and new.
Yep.
Accesses Chinua Achebe, I want to say it's Man of the People, where he says the Black academic, the Negro who left the village, we sent him to school and he went to school and then he came back here to get our sacred values to take back to the white people, to show to them that we too have values. And in doing that, you took the heart out of our culture to go present it. And I'm thinking, that's every documentary Skip Gates has ever made. And I'm saying, but to me, that's who this guy is. This Dr. Stanislas Fiaga shows up at this conference and comes up basically with a theory that Africans collaborated with Europeans to do colonialism. And that's progress. It shows that we too. And I'm thinking, this is where we are now. So I'm wondering, how do we get more people into this space? What is the role of resources, and how do we interact with people who come talking about African history and African culture and, God forbid, Black excellence and all that, but they're doing it in a way that deepens our problem and it doesn't make it easier, because they're not trying to build something parallel. They just want to end the thing that's killing us.
Yes. First and foremost, people should do the reading. The reading is important, because my people will say, if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? You just keep floating around. So Ayi Kwei Armah does a brilliant work in, when you mentioned the doctors, even his name alone is.
Yes. I'm wondering if he's ripping off of Jacobus Capitan. Remember those first Africans that went to Europe and
Yeah.
Well, the Capitan wrote his dissertation. This is what, maybe 16th century, 17th century.
I was thinking Wale Shoyinka, but that's a whole
No,
other.
I'm not.
Gates. No, the reason I brought up Capitan is because I remember the first time we went to Ghana in 1996, and I'm standing with Jacob Carruthers. We were at Elmina, at the grave of Capitan, because when he's buried there, he writes his dissertation. This is a Kano African they kidnapped and took to Europe. He wrote he wrote a dissertation on defending the slave trade, Christianizing these Africans. He's buried. Yeah. Then they sent him back to the dungeon to bless the Africans as they put him on boats. Is one of the things. He's buried at the dungeon. So the reason I even know that name is, of course, because Jacob Carruthers used to talk about Capitan all the time. And there we are standing in Cape Coast at the grave. I said, that count, huh? But he's like, yeah, brother. This is what it looks like. But how many Capitan? I think that maybe he named him because it's got the same number of sentences. The same. And then Stanislas, okay, Capitan, Jacobus Capitan. I'm like, is this who this is? But anyway.
Yeah, so he's a classic example of the kind of problems we have on the African continent. You have most of them having gone to Europe, come back, and they start speaking the language of imperialism. They might not think they're speaking the language, because my people will say, if you start indicating your father's compound with your left hand, you invariably just thrown away all your heritage. So there are a host of them. And here's a classic example of the problem the African continent faces. Even on the space that we are in, YouTube, There are a host of Africans that don't even know the basic history, but yet they're preferring solutions to problems that don't exist. And you begin to wonder, it's like, what are you doing? So Henry Gates is in the United States. Yes, he's been funded by bigger guys, but you also have millions here of Henry Gates that are on the continent. And Ayi Kwei Armah in the Resolutionaries is trying to say, these guys that have a mic, because apparently since COVID now, everybody has a mic.
Everybody. Right.
So you just press record, say anything, and then everybody's kiki kakaing, and at the end of the day, you're saying so much but saying nothing. Ayi Kwei Armah is using the Resolutionaries to tell us that, listen, there is a lot more serious work that needs to be done. But in order for that to happen, there needs to be an element of silence. Silence. Because you notice every of those conferences, there is a space there where the conversation is about the conference and not about the characters, just about the conference.
Right.
So I think when I read that, I was reading it as thinking space. Because you had Sally and Nefet looking and thinking, why am I here? What am I doing? So much so that every time they got back to their rooms, for her, that was the sanctuary. It was like running away from a problem that you're part of. So thinking about how to build companions. I mean, Nubia is a space. There are pockets of rooms. The book room. One was created yesterday, the social workers room. And that's how to start. That's how to start. Build community around a single idea.
Yeah.
If it's reading,
Yes.
do so. If it's planting, do so.
Yes.
There in the first part of the book, there was a tiny what's it called? A plant he talked about there. The berry. For those who have diabetes and you want to control your sugar level, where he said, you take this, put this in your mouth, and anything you take thereafter is sweet. And you don't have to put sugar or additives into any of your, any of the things you consume. How do you get information like that without finding people who would do the work of how can we benefit our community with things that are around us? If only we know where they are. If only we know where they are. So, sister, yeah, you push me to the book. So, the platform is yours.
Well, let me a couple of things. Kathy initially had talked about this issue of democracy and whether he's like making a mockery of it. Page 358, for those of you who may have the book following along, he says, it seemed to me more significant that after the bloodshed, the principal gain that had come to African society, the democratic vote, had been hollowed out by a constitution leaving unchanged the property, resources, and advantages stolen through apartheid for Europeans. African political leaders had ended up sharing bits of personal privilege formerly reserved for Europeans. In return, they now had the grubby job of managing mass poverty and unemployment in a society where the vast inequalities built up under apartheid persisted. I also want to say one of the things I love about Ayi Kwei Armah is he really can do it all, and he is a master of shade.
Yeah.
We do tend to idolize certain people, or particularly if social structure has already told us that this is who we should idolize. And that is what has happened in so many African communities, mine included, where, like you said, we go, they pick quote unquote the best and brightest, or at least the most malleable, and then they indoctrinate them, and then they bring them back home, and then, hey, this is the model of what you should follow. But at any rate, on page 374, Ayi Kwei Armah says, the narrative can be powerful beyond belief, even though it is totally lacking in historical truth. That is the power of deliberate lies, presented as eternal truth, The sort of fiction Plato called the great and necessary lie. We're seeing that playing out in the United States. We've seen it playing out in a lot of other places where you just tell a lie, and you tell it loud enough, and you tell it often enough, and the dumb media keeps, well, maybe they're not dumb. They're owned by their masters. I mean,